As a jaded anime fan who has spent years upon years watching hundreds upon hundreds of shows, I'm not the type to be easily impressed, which I know sounds annoying and pretentious, but it's true. By this point, I've more or less seen it all. Fun stuff, depressing stuff, surreal stuff, you name it. There's not much this medium can throw at me that catches me off guard, or at least that's what I thought. Recently, I came across an anime that made me go, hey, maybe there is still stuff out there that can blow me away. Maybe I'm not the elitist I thought I was. Well, I am, but you get the idea. Takopi's Original Sin. It's a 6-episode long high-profile anime that has taken the internet and the anime community at large by storm. That's what I would say if this video was on time, but since it's not, just imagine that sentence isn't past tense. This show is disgusting in the best possible way. It's depressing, it's uncomfortable, it's stomach-churning, it's heart-wrenching, and most importantly, it's painfully realistic. Yes, the anime about a silly pink alien octopus hailing from planet Happy is realistic and depressing. Takopi's Original Sin immediately stood out to me and so many others out there. It didn't just grab my attention, it put it in a rear naked joke. It forced me to give it the time of day, it left me no choice but to stick around and see where it goes. That's the level of attention it commanded. And for a short drama, that's insanely impressive, and as such has a fairly thorough review of the entire show, something I don't usually make unless I feel very strongly about a topic. Make sure to subscribe, or I'll break into your house with a rusted machete and I think you can figure out the rest. You can also become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, such as these ones here, custom hand-drawn badges and emojis, shoutouts and more. Just go down there and press the join button. Right, so how should I go about this? You know what, since it is such a short show, let's go through it episode by episode. Also, I promise I won't turn this into a plot summary, this is an actual review. So, it was abundantly clear right from the get-go that this show was special. Between its purposeful, jaw-dropping production value and its bold, depressing and grotesque story beats, it was obvious that this show wasn't afraid to go all the way with its themes. The story follows Shizuka Kuze, a timid child who faces relentless bullying, both physical and psychological, at school, especially at the hands of Marina Kirarazaka. One day she runs into a silly pink alien octopus thing who she names Takopi, and that's where the story begins. Now, before we get to it, it is worth mentioning that the entire idea of the character Takopi is almost certainly a direct reference to Doraemon. Now, if you grew up in India and you're around my age, you're more than familiar with that name, but for those of you who don't live in a country that dubs Japanese kids anime from the 80s into regional languages, Doraemon is an old, long-running episodic anime meant for kids, and the similarities between it and Takopi's Original Sin are quite obvious. Between the timid protagonists that face bullying, that iconic 3 stacked pipes in the park image, the main character of one show and the love interest of the main character of the other show sharing the same name, and the idea of an unorthodox being pulling out magical gadgets to help the main characters, it's not exactly subtle. Now, why did I bring this comparison up? Well, I have my reasons. Firstly, it makes it look like I did more research than I actually did, and secondly, by focusing not on the similarities but on the differences between the two shows, we can get a clear idea of what Takopi's Original Sin tries to accomplish. Like I said, Doraemon is a kids show, and naturally the bullying in it is kid-friendly, and each episode ends in a happy, conclusive manner. Obviously, why give literal toddlers trauma by being realistic? Takopi, on the other hand, has a master's degree in traumatizing its audience. It tries, and for the most part succeeds, at creating a narrative that's free of that forced positivity that plagues storytelling as a whole. It feels real, fantastical elements and all. Another thing worth mentioning right off the bat is how this show is aware of its limitations, most notably its short runtime. It knows there's an upper limit on the amount of stuff it can realistically explore, and it plays its cards accordingly, leaving entire characters and story beats untouched. Every single parent, for example, and focusing exclusively on the elements that directly influence the cast, and that's not a bad thing. Focusing on too many things at once can make a story come off as confused and meandering. I'm glad this show doesn't overestimate its abilities. Another crucial aspect that makes this show click is its production value. Stuff like direction, animation, sound and music, these things can make or break an anime, and thankfully, Takopi's production value was through the roof. The show was directed by Shinya Ino, and since my first exposure to his work was the fun and jovial Dr. Stone, I did not expect him to have something like this in his bag. I was pleasantly surprised. Of course, a competent director alone usually isn't enough to carry a production. You need high-level talent at every step of the way. And as you might have guessed, Takopi had that. Over on the directorial side of things, the show boasted names like Moang, Eri Irei, Toya Oshima, and Hirotaka Mori, the latter being the director of Heavenly Delusion, which I think speaks for itself. And over on the animation side of things, major names like Shu Sugita, Keiichiro Saito, Kai Ikarashi, Reno Nodera, Toshiyuki Sato, and many more made their presence felt. The staff list of this show being filled with talent of the highest level, and said talent being provided with the amount of time required, presumably, allowed the team to put an unfathomable amount of care and intent behind each shot. It allowed them to fully realize their visions and make the show more or less exactly the way they wanted to. The harsh line art, the large amount of character acting, the use of contradictory music and visual styles, the copious amounts of background animation that ranged from realistic to heavily distorted depending on the context, stuff like that added a lot to this show. In fact, I can confidently say that if this exact show written in the exact same manner looked weaker, it wouldn't even be half as impactful. That's the difference production value can make. And those were the three general things that made this show so good: the realistic writing, the laser-focused storytelling, and the top-notch production. Let's now go through the story. The first episode was probably the most shocking one from this show, although that doesn't mean the rest of the show wasn't shocking, it absolutely was. Episode 1 caught a lot of people, myself included, off guard with how visceral and graphic it was. The violent, hard-to-watch depictions of bullying and that suffocating feeling of the walls closing in around our protagonist and her having nowhere to go or no one to talk to, it was bold to say the least. The shots felt unsettling, if that makes sense. That sense of unease, that feeling that something either was wrong or was about to go wrong, it was so well conveyed. The accumulation of abuse and trauma, it felt claustrophobic. I, as the viewer, felt terrible for Shizuka, I felt helpless, and that's exactly what the show was trying to do. Even Takopi and his reality-bending gadgets felt more like a gimmick and less like an actual solution. That disconcerting feeling kept building and building until it reached a breaking point, that being the moment where Shizuka's dog was taken away from her. Once that happened, she lost everything. The metaphorical walls fully caved in on her, and she did something I won't say out loud for monetization reasons. Also, quick sidebar, I know this is a serious topic and all, but you know, there are some shots that we just don't need, alright? I didn't need to see a POV shot through Shizuka's dead eyes. That's just not necessary. It's like that one shot of Yuji through Nobara's blown out eye. Nobody needs that, please stop. Anyway, when that happened, I was like, please do anything to unhappen it. I don't care about lazy writing, just fix it. And they did. They introduced time travel, and I was relieved because thank God this innocent child was now alive. But then concern took over. You see, it's very easy for a time travel mechanic to wring all the tension out of his story. Think about it, why would anything feel consequential when the characters can just go back in time and make it so that said thing never happened? Time travel is a slippery slope, but thankfully the show didn't abuse that mechanic. The characters did travel back in time a lot, but one, they traveled back to a point where a lot of bad shit had already happened, so the tension was still there, and two, their time travel never led to a more favorable outcome, which added to that whole walls closing in feeling. Not only was Shizuka helpless, even literal time travel wasn't enough to fix the situation. It doesn't get more bleak than that, does it? And that was episode 1, an attention-grabbing watch that did impress me but ultimately left me a bit confused and concerned. Sure, the show is really well written and executed, but where will it ultimately go, I wondered. Will it try to tell a purposeful story, or will it stick to being an abuse compilation and depression simulator? Thankfully, the answer to that was the former. The next 3 episodes, instead of relying on shock factor, focused on establishing the premise and fleshing out the characters. Of course, there were a few shocking out-of-nowhere moments, Marina's death for example, an event so random that I expected them to undo it immediately via time travel, but surprisingly enough, that's when they decided to eliminate that mechanic, meaning the second most consequential thing that had happened up until that point was now permanent, which genuinely surprised me. Also, the way Shizuka reacted to it was mortifying. Seeing this child be so mentally broken that she is unable to fully comprehend the severity of what just happened and rejoice in what is clearly a traumatic event, it was heartbreaking. Moving on, the third episode focused on Marina and her, quite frankly, really unfortunate circumstances. And the fourth episode presented a competently written, self-contained arc focusing on Azuma, one with a fantastic conclusion, might I add. These two episodes accomplished four things. 1. They fleshed out the cast. 2. They put a spotlight on the mental decay and desensitization Shizuka had undergone due to all the abuse she had suffered. 3. It started building Takopi's character. And 4. It established the core idea behind the story, the central theme, if you will. It's the idea of pain, abuse, and trauma being contagious, something that passes from one person to another. Marina's father hurt her mother, who in turn hurt her, which led to her hurting Shizuka. Shizuka would then go on to hurt Takopi. Trauma is a chain, it spreads and compounds. That's the main idea behind the story, and it's fascinating. Which brings us to episode 5. And quick crash course about writing tension into a scene. There's something particularly unnerving about us, the audience, knowing something bad that the character doesn't. It makes the viewer anxious. We knew Chappie wasn't at Shizuka's dad's place, we knew he had been put down, which made a starry-eyed journey to Tokyo, complete with the cheerful music, so much more harrowing. It was just more trauma to add to the pile. By this point, Takopi was really starting to question Shizuka's actions, which ultimately led to the big reveal, the big boy plot twist, and once again I was completely caught off guard. Takopi's flashback turned him into the protagonist. A couple of episodes back, he was starting to sympathize with Marina and question Shizuka's decision to trick her parents. Now, he was put in a situation where he was made to choose between Shizuka and Marina, and by this point, he had grown enough to struggle with that decision. By the way, anyone that makes a "Shizuka lost her humanity, Takopi gained his" comment is getting executed by firing squad. Yes, that's exactly what happened, but don't phrase it like that. Are you 12? Grow up. Another thing episode 5 did was introduce time travel outside of that camera, which terrified me. I was worried that the ending of this show would just be Takopi going back in time to when, I don't know, Marina was born and fixing everything, which would have been a horrible cop-out. Thank God that didn't happen. And that brings us to the ending, the most interesting aspect of this show and one I have mixed feelings about. Remember that chain I talked about a few minutes back, how trauma is contagious? Well, for most of the story, Shizuka found herself on the receiving end of this trauma with no one to pass it on to, but by now she had started to take it out on Takopi. Takopi, however, broke the curse. Despite receiving abuse from Shizuka, he didn't fall into despair. He didn't allow that chain to propagate. He responded to hate with love and care, going as far as to sacrifice himself just to give both Shizuka and Marina another chance. That same naive optimism that made his character feel childish near the start now served as a much needed reprieve from all the bad stuff. No matter what happened, no matter how bleak and hopeless things got, no matter how much abuse he found himself on the receiving end of, Takopi clung to his beliefs and his desire to see both Marina and Shizuka be happy. That's great, but what happened next was... let's talk about it. First things first, the ending was great at a conceptual level. The idea that not everything can be fixed no matter how hard you try, it's such a bittersweet road to go down. Just because Shizuka and Marina became friends doesn't mean their lives were now perfect. Shizuka would continue to be neglected by her parents while Marina would continue to be abused by hers, as proven by her still having the scar on her face. Things won't magically go back to normal, and I like that. As depressing as it might be, it makes sense. Not every conflict gets resolved, not every bad thing in your life turns around for the better, not every bad thing you've done gets forgiven, that's life. I love that. Takopi didn't make Marina and Shizuka's lives perfect, he couldn't. All he did was make sure they had someone to rely on, someone to talk to, as they fought their way through their unfortunate situations. That's great, all of that's great, but what's less great is the way the show accomplished this ending. Like I said, the chain of trauma and hatred is the most significant narrative device in this show. It drives the plot forward. Naturally, this chain breaking is a crucial event. Takopi didn't break the chain, he just made it so that it didn't propagate further. The one who broke the chain was Marina. And how did this crucial event occur? By both characters having a shared flashback. That's it. They just remembered that silly pink octopus and went, you know, we should be friends. That's literally it. No accountability on Marina's part, no restitution for Shizuka. Nothing, just we were enemies 5 seconds ago, but now we're friends. I don't think that's sufficient, it feels superficial. I understand that they are kids and that kids fight and make up all the time, but I think Marina and Shizuka's relationship is a bit more complex than just kids who happen to have an argument, and as such I don't think their bonding felt deserved. I don't know, it is just a nitpick in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's significant enough to mention. And that's Takopi's original sin, a bold, unforgiving, uncomfortable, bittersweet and beautifully produced anime that leaves a strong impression on the viewer. It's one of those shows you don't forget for a while. While I do think it fumbled the ending a bit, it still is a great show, and I can appreciate the message it was going for. Fantastic work. And that should just about do it. Like and subscribe. A special thanks to Nood03, Pawel and Amir for becoming tier 3 members, and until next time.